That's right. Exclamation point. Good morning, I'm Bill Hemmer. Hope you're doing great at home. Partial government shutdown looming, and if lawmakers do not reach a deal, that's exactly what will happen next week. As the clock ticks down, neither side showing any signs of budging. Here's Sarah Sanders on that.
Committed to protecting every single American citizen. He knows that without border security and without borders, you have no country at all. And he's calling on Democrats to step up and actually do their jobs and protect the American people and work with him in that process.
I want to be crystal clear. There will be no additional appropriations to pay for the border wall. It's done. President Trump has several ways to avoid a shutdown. He should pick one, and soon.
Ellison Barber picks up our coverage live from the North Lawn there at the White House. Ellison, good morning.
Good morning to you. President Trump says that Democrats are being hypocrites here and that he's going to do whatever it takes to get his border wall, to get border security. Democrats say President Trump is throwing a temper tantrum. President Trump posted a video on Twitter that included old clips of Democrats talking about border security and barriers.
The fact is, they've always supported fences and walls and partitions, but you know what? They only don't want to do it because of me.
Mr. Trump met with the top Democrats in the House and Senate this week, and they very publicly argued over funding for the border wall. The public and private part of that Oval Office meeting ended without a concrete resolution. President Trump wants $5 billion for the wall. Democrats say they're not really going to do more than 1.3. The president said he'd carry the mantle if the government shuts down. Representative Nancy Pelosi later told reporters she and the president spoke, and Trump told her the White House was looking at the options she and Senator Chuck Schumer laid out. Now there's the president's Twitter video. We posted it along with the caption, "Let's not do a shutdown. Democrats do what's right for the American people."
Chuck and I are not in a negotiation of, we're not going for the $5 billion for the wall. We simply are not.
They have to put the people ahead of politics. We need to have the wall. We need border security. Whatever it takes to get border security, I will do it. I pledged that a long time ago, and I will pledge it always.
About 3/4 of the U.S. government is set to run out of money come December 21st. Bill?
Thank you, Ellison. Ellison Barber from the White House there, watching that. Thank you.
Meanwhile, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen is speaking out for the first time since he was sentenced to 3 years behind bars. Laura Ingle is here with more on Cohen's interview, and he had a lot to say, Laura, in this sit-down.
He certainly did, and Michael Cohen seemingly getting a lot off of his chest here, admitting in an interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos that he knows, quote, what he did was wrong, and that he is angry with himself for his role in the deals he says he made on behalf of President Trump, designed to influence the 2016 presidential election. Cohen talked about many of his regrets and also explained why anyone should believe what he is saying now after admitting to and being convicted of lying to Congress.
Stated emphatically that the information that I gave to them was credible and helpful. There's a substantial amount of information that they possess that corroborates the fact that I am telling the truth.
So you're done with the lying?
I am done with the lying. I am done being loyal to President Trump.
And President Trump has pushed back against the accusations and says they are being made to make him look bad. Michael Cohen saying he will not be the villain of this story. Back to you.
All right, Laura, both President Trump and Michael Cohen accusing each other in this back and forth of making these hush money deals. What more do we know?
Yeah, it continues to get more interesting. Cohen says that he was showing blind loyalty to Mr. Trump as he arranged the payouts. President Trump claims he never directed Cohen to do anything wrong. Cohen's response to that?
I don't think there's anybody that believes that. He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters.
This interview taking place after Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in prison Wednesday by a federal judge here in New York on tax evasion, campaign finance violations in connection with the hush money deals to 2 women. That's porn star Stormy Daniels and former Playmate Karen McDougal, who both claimed to have had affairs with Mr. Trump before he ran for office, which he has denied. And legal experts say President Trump is invoking the advice of counsel defense in response to the payouts. He says he was following terrible advice from a bad lawyer. Sandra.
All right, Laura Ingle, thank you.
A lot to talk about now. The list is long with our headliner today, Hogan Gidley, White House Deputy Press Secretary. Sir, thank you for coming back and welcome to America. I know you're aware of the Michael Cohen interview from earlier today. What's the White House reaction on this, and what are you hearing from the president on it?
Look, quite frankly, for the media
good morning, everybody. Trump versus Cohen. New reaction now for the president and his former attorney. The accusations
and self-admitted doing just that is quite frankly laughable. The president has
we say
maintained
hello on
and
a
said
Friday.
many
I'm Bill Hemmer
times
live inside
he has
of him.
never instructed Michael Cohen to do anything illegal. We stand by that.
What is the White House expecting meanwhile from these Michael Flynn documents that are about to be turned over this afternoon, 3 p.m. deadline the judge has set to learn more about what happened with the interaction of the FBI and Michael Flynn in that interview from January 2017?
Right. Well, you made the best point probably, and that's the judge himself wanted more information about how this information was obtained. We know James Comey even made comments under oath and said in testimony that, listen, we knew there were things at the White House that weren't set up yet. We took advantage of that to get information. That's a problem, and I think that the facts will bear themselves out in that case as well. But the fact is, most Americans are concerned about, or should be concerned, I should say, about exactly how this information was obtained, and I think that we'll actually know that later on when the deadlines are reached.
I want to go back to this interview with Harris Faulkner here on Fox from yesterday. The president talking about Michael Cohen here. Watch.
I never directed him to do anything wrong. Whatever he did on his own. He's a lawyer. A lawyer who represents a client is supposed to do the right thing. That's why you pay them a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. He is a lawyer. He represents a client. I never directed him to do anything incorrect or wrong.
Specific question. Did Michael Cohen tell the president if he makes this payment that it could be a crime, it would be illegal? Did he say that?
Look, I don't know about that particular part of the private conversation. I know what the president has maintained, that he's never instructed Michael Cohen to break any laws. The fact is, Michael Cohen's a convicted criminal, and the FBI had him dead to rights. And what he decided to do was to reduce his sentence. And in the meantime, he cut a deal and betrayed a former employer.
Meanwhile, I want to ask you about this Wall Street Journal report about the president's inaugural committee currently being investigated by federal prosecutors. Sarah Sanders went on with Martha last night and responded this way to that.
That doesn't have anything to do with the president or the first lady. The biggest thing the president did in his engagement in the inauguration was to come here and raise his hand and take the oath of office. The president was focused on the transition during that time and not on any of the planning.
A lawyer who represents a client.
So can you respond to this? This is the Wall Street Journal headline: Trump inauguration spending under a criminal investigation by federal prosecutors, Hogan.
Right, that's ridiculous. And Sarah Sanders was absolutely right. This has nothing to do with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. It has nothing to do with the administration. During transition, as you know, the president had one focus, and that was to come into office, set up a government, and right the wrongs of the Barack Obama administration. He did just that. On inauguration night, everyone knows the President of the United States has one task: to show up, thank everybody for their service, to help him get elected, and dance with the First Lady. And that's exactly what he did.
Let's talk about the border wall. What comes of this next week when you know there's a deadline? The president said he'll own the thing. Does he still feel that way?
Look, what the president owns is the constitutional duty to protect the American people. And what we saw on full display for the world to see in the Oval Office was Chuck Schumer, the head of the Democrats in the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi, the head of the Democrats in the House, say to the American people, we do not stand with you in your protection. We stand with hundreds of thousands of people who are here illegally and unlawfully, as opposed to hundreds of millions of American citizens. That's a dangerous place for an entire political party to say, we disregard the safety and security of American communities and American families, and instead stand with those who come to this country illegally, many human traffickers, drug traffickers, child smugglers. That's a bad place for them to be, and the president wants that fight all day.
How much concern is there that you could get the blame for this? And if that's the case, does the president have any plans next week to address the American people and explain why he's taking the position he's taking?
Well, we're talking about several tactics here in the White House and how we can move forward. But I mean, look, I was standing in the Oval Office and watched Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi give each other nonverbal cues the entire time and basically refused to give eye contact to the president because they were trying to play off each other. And what they did when the president said, we're going to have this conversation in a transparent way in front of all the world to see, they didn't like that and didn't want that. They prefer those those locked doors and those back rooms, smoke-filled, to make deals and cut deals that hurt the American people. But the president said no more. I'm standing for you, the American people. They are standing for people who are here illegally. That's a big difference in parties, and I think the American people understand just where each camp stands in that particular matter.
You mentioned Chuck Schumer several times there. Here he is on the Senate floor on this issue yesterday.
If the president really believed what he tweeted this morning, that his new NAFTA would pay for the wall, he wouldn't be threatening to shut down the government. It's not a serious proposal. It's a throwaway idea the president used in the campaign and still uses to fire up his base.
Yeah, Hogan, I mean, you mentioned that Oval Office exchange, and there were some stunning moments, and one of them stunning even to members of the president's own party when he said he would be proud to shut down the government over this. Is there any fear in the White House that the president gave up some leverage in this debate with that remark?
Now, what he's doing is telling the American people he's proud to stand with them and proud to protect them. For a second there, when you said you were going to play the clip of Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor, I thought you were going to talk about in 2006 when he and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and Barack Obama all voted for a border fence act to secure the border along the southern area of this country and also vote for border security. Some reason, though, they've changed their tune, and I think one of the reasons why is because Donald Trump is in the White House and they refuse to work with somebody on the right who wants to protect the American people. Also, the political calculus has changed. They feel like they can have these people rush the borders, come into our country, be a drain on society, and then get them as voters later on. It's a deplorable position for them to be in. The president's on the right side, and he's with the American people. 70% of the American people agree with this president on the issue, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out why the Democrats are standing with illegal aliens as opposed to the American people.
On that point, again, does he plan to explain to the American people what his position is?
Oh, he's done it multiple times in multiple areas. Remember,
I get it. Listen, he's doing a ton of interviews. I get it. But maybe the Oval Office, maybe the Roosevelt Room, maybe the Rose Garden, perhaps, on a nice day in December.
That's a pretty good strategy. You want to come over here maybe and get a job?
I've got a job. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But listen, 2 Octobers ago, this president put forth a 70-point immigration plan. The first part of this year, back in January, we put forth 4 pillars that we were trying to stand by and explain to the American people just how dangerous the situation is. And Democrats said there was no crisis. There was no danger to the American people. Then the videos surfaced of the caravan throwing rocks at our border agents all along the way, the instances of rape, convicted criminals in the caravan, terrorists in the caravan, and now all of a sudden the Democrats are nowhere to be found. He wants to have this conversation transparently out in the open. Democrats don't want it because they know they're on the wrong side of the American people. They're adhering to their radical left base and also some of those special interest groups that pad their pockets every election year.
Okay. Meanwhile, the president needs a chief of staff, and we have been following this. We kind of know who's been in, who's out. Where do things stand this morning? Who is on the short list?
Look, the president said yesterday with the newly elected governors in the cabinet room for all the world to see that he had about 5 people he was considering. We know he'll make a good choice. He wants someone to come in here to support his agenda, help get that agenda passed moving into the next Congress, and he'll do that. There are a lot of people who want the job. We've whittled down the list now to about 5, and the president will make that decision and that announcement when he's ready.
Okay. How long will Secretary Kelly stay on?
I'm not sure what the actual plan is. I know he's on through at least the end of the year, but I mean, the president plans to make a decision
January
fairly
2nd.
quickly.
I just didn't know if that was a more pliable date. Could he stay on for another month and a half, maybe?
Well, look, he is. I imagine if he and the president need to work a deal out like that, they absolutely can. John Kelly has done an amazing job as chief of staff serving this president. He is a dear friend of mine and one of the funniest people, quite frankly, in the White House that I know. You know, the president's going to make another pick, and when that pick is announced and brought into the office, John Kelly will move on to his next deal, which I'm sure will be successful.
Is there a general expectation on timing for that you could manage our expectations year end?
Yeah. I think the end of the year is right, the beginning of January. But again, it's their prerogative. If they want to continue on, if the president hasn't made his mind up yet, then I'm sure that they can do that. But right now, the president has said he has 5 people, and he's going to make the announcement imminently. So we expect him to do just that.
Good to have you on today. Hope you come back real soon. Got a lot more to go through. Hogan Gidley, thanks from the North Lawn.
Thanks, Hogan.
Thanks so much.
All right, meanwhile, Trump slamming General Motors yet again, what he is now saying about the company's decision to announce those big layoffs weeks before Christmas.
Also, Sandra, sticking with the auto industry, China making an announcement that will impact American-made vehicles. The money man Charles Payne has the story on that. He'll join us next.
We cannot continue to lose $500 billion a year to China. And I had a fantastic meeting with President Xi. This was a 4-hour meeting where everything was agreed on. Now, if we get it down in paper, that'll be another story, but I think we will.
After that Strasbourg Christmas market shooting, of course, this all happened on Tuesday. The killer, Sharif Shakat, was killed on Thursday by police on a city street there after he opened fire on officers. So a 4th person now dead in this attack, and as we know, multiple more injured. We'll continue to follow this story for you from Paris.
In the meantime, back here in the U.S., 20 past the hour. Check of the markets. We dropped sharply at the open. Not terrible now. A bit of a bounce back. Reports that China's economy is slowing down. That's having a big effect out there. Host of Making Money, Charles Payne, 2 o'clock Fox Business with us now. Hello, sir. What's the headline from China?
The growth is slowing dramatically across the board. 2 important economic data pieces. Industrial production, that's the lowest in several years. Retail sales, the lowest, I think it goes back like maybe 10 years or something. Just an enormous slowdown in their economy. So this talks about corporations, it talks about investments, all the way to the average consumer in China.
Why the slowdown?
A massive slowdown. It's been happening for some time. But it's been exacerbated, I think, by the trade war. But it's something I always invite people, don't just go to January when we look at China's stock market. Look at where it was in 2015. It has been coming down like a rock. And that's why I think President Trump was smart to go engage into this right now. They've got massive debt issues. They've got credit issues. They got rich people trying to get their money out of the country. They still have 400 million people who are peasants. You have to deal with that while everyone else is driving cars. They're still on bicycles. They've got some issues there. Now it's a great time for them to come to the table. And by the way, they also did that last night, at least with the auto tariffs. They put them on hold for 3 months. So we got, the pieces are being moved on both sides. Actions are being taken, the kind of things you want to see as we build into the ultimate negotiation.
Okay, on that topic, Harris asked him about it yesterday.
She did.
Said this.
What really makes it fantastic is that we have placed tremendous tariffs on China. That when China sends things into America now, they're paying 25% interest on everything they send in. But I released them of that temporarily until the end of the 90 days to see whether or not we could make a deal. But just one thing. After that, I have an additional $267 billion worth of taxes, essentially, to put on China. And they don't want that.
Where's that go? They don't want that.
No, they don't want that. Listen, no one likes to have to do these things. It's necessary. It's been building up. And I really believe there have been concrete steps on China's part. I know the knee-jerk reaction is so frustrating. Anybody out there, particularly investors, and you watch the news, financial news, is to completely dismiss everything that comes out of China, even the actions that they're taking, whether it's buying $500 million of soybeans in one day, whether it's, saying we're going to put the tariffs on hold, whether it's saying we're going to buy liquid natural gas, and actually doing these things. Both sides would like to see some sort of resolution.
So this is leading to a nervous stock market. Globally, we saw a sell-off as a result of that news on the economy. But
here's the irony, though. The China economy slowdown is much more of an economic threat than a tariff story. Much more, because it's the world's second largest economy. Also, Europe had some weak numbers, too. We don't want their economy. We don't want their economy to fall apart. We would love to sell them things. Hey, you know what? We love to sell them the products that we make. So we don't want their economy to fall apart.
Speaking of selling, our retail sales are off the hook for the holiday season. What is it?
Absolutely phenomenal. That tells me that the American consumer has more money than they've had in a long time. They've got more confidence that they've had in a long time, and they are going out there buying. Let me tell you something. This number today that came out for November, it was through the roof, and the revisions were phenomenal. By the way, GDP, I think it's going to, without saying now, this year we will see more than 3% GDP for the entire year. This number put us over the top. Absolutely phenomenal. Here's the bad thing, real quick, guys. This week, investors took more money out of the market than ever before in a 1 week period. They got scared.
They're paying for the bills too?
It's scaring me though. No, you don't have this. They got the money. They're afraid. They put it in money market, so it's in cash. They didn't take it all the way out. They took about $90 billion out between ETFs and mutual funds. 81 of that billion is just sitting in their accounts. They got afraid. But here's the problem. The bearishness is at the highest level since 2011. If you go back, I went back to the data, and I just went the last 2 years, that bearishness was above 48%. The last time was 2011, September 2011. The Dow was at 10,700. 6 months later, it was at 13,000. After that, it was February 2016. The Dow was at 15,600. 6 months later, 18,500. I'm really worried when people have these sort of emotional meltdowns because 6 months later, the last 2 times they did this, the market soared.
Wow.
So I'm worried about that.
All right.
Some good data points.
Oh, man, I was up all morning working on this. But I'm excited. You got to be excited.
Opportunity is what
it's
you're
opportunity for us. I don't want people to panic. I understand it's a nervous time. But believe we are the strongest country in the world, and there are times where we have to take a stand.
I'll see you at 2 o'clock today.
Okay.
Have a great vacation.
Hey.
Merry Christmas, sir. There he is. He's like Santa Claus.
Go get some rest this weekend. We need you back here Monday morning. All right. Well, a federal judge taking a close look at the FBI treatment of Michael Flynn and how it handled his interview. Those documents due this afternoon, 3 p.m. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa will join us live next.
Also, the president taking a swipe at Michael Cohen, and Cohen is firing back. Our A-team reacts to that interview today. Coming up next.
He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters, including the one with McDougal.
Welcome back. President Trump slamming his former attorney, and today we are hearing from Michael Cohen for the first time since he was sentenced to jail for 3 years. Let's bring in America's A-team. Juan Williams is here. Fox News political analyst and co-host of The Five, Shelby Holliday from The Wall Street Journal, and Byron York, chief political correspondent for The Washington Examiner. Good morning to all of you. I want to just generally get your thoughts to kick things off. Byron, your first time on the A-team. Good to have you here this morning.
Thank you.
He's always on our A-team.
He's always our A-team, usually leading off our 9 o'clock hour. But if you could just, you've been writing about this, and now you've heard from Michael Cohen since his sentencing. Your thoughts this morning?
I don't think it affects affects things all that much. All of this talk we're doing this morning is about Michael Cohen and this campaign finance violation that he pleaded guilty to and said President Trump directed him to make. But Michael Cohen is going to jail for 3 years because he cheated on his taxes and defrauded a bank, and that is what gave prosecutors the leverage over him. And you have to remember, as far as the president's defense is concerned, there are a lot of conservative scholars and lawyers who believe the Karen McDougal payoff and the Stormy Daniels payoff were not criminal. They believe that this idea of something that's been done to influence an election has been grossly distorted. So if it comes to it, you're going to see the president argue, this wasn't a crime. He pleaded guilty because they nailed him to the wall, but it wasn't a crime.
Well, the president could make that argument, but instead he's calling Michael Cohen a liar and saying that Michael Cohen made these things up to embarrass the president. So his setting up this credibility fight with Michael Cohen may not go over so well with him, because you have Michael Cohen admitting in court under oath that he committed these crimes. You have prosecutors saying, we believe Michael Cohen, we have evidence that corroborates it. And Michael Cohen's going to jail for 3 years. It's a little difficult to say he's lying just to embarrass me at this point. But I also think Michael Cohen's interview this morning was interesting because he acknowledged that he is still willing and open to cooperate with not just the special counsel, but also the Southern District of New York, the New York Attorney's Office, and other.
It makes you wonder what he knows. And the
president.
question's been asked, what's he hiding that he has on President Trump?
Yes.
I think the question should be asked, what's he hiding about himself?
Yes,
and,
or his family.
and we don't know what that answer is, A or B. Juan, where were you on the Cohen thing this morning?
Well, I think that there's so much going on here, but the one thing that I would say is that the prosecutors clearly think that a crime occurred. And, you know, it doesn't matter left or right if the prosecutors believe so and are pursuing it. The additional factor here is David Pecker from the National Enquirer. Pecker, is it Pecker? Yeah.
Pecker.
David Pecker, yeah.
From the National Enquirer, who said that it was, in fact, intended to influence the outcome of the election. The president was trying to hide the fact that he had had these affairs with these women and didn't want it to come out. So the timing is critical. So you can have people argue, well, you know, everybody wants to cover up things that could hurt their families or embarrass them. But it's the critical timing here, right before the election, that I think the prosecutors have honed in on. And so it's not only
these
Cohen,
election violations,
it's also the publisher of that tabloid.
Different interpretations for all this law. But Byron, you write a piece, why Republicans shrug off the Michael Cohen case. Why is that? What is your conclusion?
Because they don't believe this is an actual campaign finance violation. That paying off a woman for her silence, in this case, may be unethical. It may be a really bad thing to do, but it does not violate the campaign finance laws. And another argument the president might make is that, well, the short ways to say it is, I've been paying off women for years when I wasn't running for anything. So therefore, this was not because of a specific election. This is perhaps a pattern.
I think the timing is exactly to the contrary, because it's right before the election and you have people who corroborate what we've heard from Cohen.
Well, I would just
what
add one
about
other
this?
thing, too.
If you're a private businessman, right? You're Michael Bloomberg. You're running for president. You're a couple months before the election. You tell your guy, hey, man, all these lawsuits against me, just go ahead and settle them. Let's get them out of the way. Is that a violation? Is that intended to influence the outcome of the election? Of course it is, because you know, in the sense that you want to get the table clean. Doesn't mean you're cheating in any way, but you want to clear the table.
No, you're defrauding the American people by denying them information on which to cast their vote.
Is it fraud, Shelby, or is it just trying to clear the decks?
Well, there are good arguments both ways, but the Journal has been doing a lot of reporting on this, and they place President Trump. This is more than a month ago. We had a story where President Trump had a meeting with David Pecker in 2015 and said, David, what can you do to help my campaign? And they discussed this idea of buying stories, catching and killing stories about women. And so because from 2015 up until after the Access Hollywood tape dropped, this was talked about in the context of the election, it could be a problem for the president.
But you raise a good point. I believe Trump settled the Trump University lawsuit when he was getting a lot of heat during the campaign.
But that wasn't accepting a corporate donation or an illegal campaign fund.
But wasn't it if he settled it, wouldn't that be to influence the course of an election?
But that's not an illegal contribution. That's him settling
What's
a lawsuit.
illegal about paying a woman?
So the corporate donation from AMI, which AMI is cooperating
Only
with
if it's actually a campaign
but they've said
contribution.
it is. In the statement of facts, they acknowledge this was made intended to help the president.
But if it were used against the president, he would have a different point of view.
And this is where it goes, deep
But
down
this
the
is the
rabbit
issue,
hole,
yes.
on and on again. Here's Cohen earlier today on ABC. Watch this, and we'll hear from the president, too.
Those charges were just agreed to by him in order to embarrass the president and get a much reduced prison sentence.
I know which tweets you're talking about. First of all, it's absolutely not true. I did not do it to embarrass the president. The truth is, I told the truth. I took responsibility for my actions. And instead of him taking responsibility for his actions, what does he do? He attacks my family.
Not said in that interview, too. I think with the Southern District of New York, too, there's a wide open question here. And Cohen pointed to that about the information they have. Where that goes, I do not know. Here's how the president reacted just yesterday on this.
He was a lawyer, and because of that, I did it. And you know what? In retrospect, I made a mistake, because what he did was all unrelated to me, except for the 2 campaign finance charges that are not criminal and shouldn't have been on there. They put that on to embarrass me. They put those 2 charges on to embarrass me. They're not criminal charges.
One other thing about Michael Cohen, when you talked about what else he might have, a lot of speculation about that. A lot of things may involve Trump businesses that he knows about. But remember, one of the reasons we heard about him was in connection with alleged collusion with the Russians in the 2016 campaign. And the famous dossier said that he met with Russians in Prague for the specific purpose of paying off the Russians for this hacking operation. Now, Michael Cohen has denied this all over the place, and it's going to be interesting to see where that goes.
I think it's really interesting from the interview to hear, one, the president go after Cohen's family. I think that may, in fact, antagonize Cohen. And as you saw in the interview, Cohen mentions this. He goes after Cohen's wife, Cohen's father-in-law. And now I think it puts Cohen back in a position where previously he might have said, well, I've got 3 years. As Byron pointed out, you know, he was guilty of tax fraud and other issues. But I think it puts him back now and saying, wait, the president's going after me. I feel like I had been loyal to him, covering up for what he called his dirty deeds. And now they're back in the middle of this fisticuffs.
Shelby, could you just conclude for us today? There's this deadline for the judge has ordered these documents to be turned over from the FBI's interview with Michael Flynn. What we expect today?
Well, we don't know what's in the actual document, but the judge wants to see it before he makes a decision on Flynn's sentencing, which is expected next week. And I think maybe what Flynn filed last week in his sentencing memo worked politically in a sense that he's still admitting he lied, and he's still acknowledging wrongdoing, that he lied to FBI agents. But he floated this notion that he was interviewed by Peter Strzok and was set up by Andy McCabe. And that has caused the president and a lot of President Trump supporters to come out and say, I don't know about this.
He may have found the right judge to find this out, though.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a very good point.
Well, this may be encouraging for Flynn supporters, but we cannot read Judge Sullivan's mind. Judge Sullivan always wants to see all the evidence on either side, but that does not mean he's going to do anything in reaction to it.
Nice shirt, Juan.
You know, I got it from your closet.
Shelby, nice to have you back. Byron, stand by, okay? Meanwhile, Melania Trump now opening up on a personal side in a revealing interview with Sean Hannity. The First Lady slamming the media for the way they treat her 12-year-old son. We'll play that out for you and let you know how she characterized it.
I'm going to bring up John Kasich, and I'm going to bring up Arizona Senator Jeff Flake. Because they say they may run against you in 2020.
I hope so.
What do you say to these men who think they have a shot in 2020?
I think I have the greatest base in the history of politics. I have people that I love and that love me, frankly. That includes a lot of women.
So with Harris yesterday, he talked about how unimpressed he was by potential Republican challengers. Back with the A-team, Juan Williams in a nice-looking shirt. Shelby Holliday and Byron York. What do you think, Byron? Someone take him on or not?
I think it's a real possibility. There's been talk of John Kasich, the Ohio governor, or Jeff Flake. But I think the thing is, unless the world changes in some big way, there's no way a challenger is going to beat President Trump in Republican primaries. The president has huge support among Republicans, and that's not going to work. But people who are organizing this do say no sitting president who has been primaried for re-election has gone on to win. They're talking about Jimmy Carter, they're talking about Gerald Ford, they're talking about George H.W. Bush. So the idea would be to damage Trump enough in the primaries so that he could not win re-election.
Shelby? Well, Senator Jeff Flake is one of the people who says whether or not he runs, he wants to see somebody run against President Trump. And it's for that reason. He doesn't think President Trump, he's made it very clear, he doesn't think he's a great president. He wants to see him challenged. The idea would be to weaken President Trump and possibly to hurt him down the road. But the risk is that you lose the presidency to Democrats. So if these Republicans like Senator Flake or John Kasich are willing to allow that outcome to happen, that's where they have to make the decision.
Do you think Flake or Kasich would be significant in any way? Do you think they would be substantial?
I agree with my colleagues.
To soften up the
No, I agree with my colleagues.
beachhead, as they're saying?
Well, that's exactly. But, you know, listening to President Trump, especially his comment about women, it's just like you sit there and go, what is he talking about?
On that point, go ahead, Sandra. Right, roll it.
I have tremendous women support. But if you remember the last election, I was worried I wouldn't get one woman in the whole United States to run. And I got tremendous. I mean, Hillary wished she had my numbers, okay? Hillary got trounced with women. And I'll tell you something. The news and the polls are really fake. But I have the greatest base in history.
He set you up.
He's unbelievable. I mean, I just love him because he, you know, for our purposes, you can't stop talking about what he's saying. It's so unbelievable. I mean, he just says things that are crazy.
Hillary wished she had my number.
Well, you know what? Maybe he won among white women, but he lost women of all kinds. And then in the midterms elections, the gender gap was 23 points. 23
Shelby, what
points.
About that support?
And let me just finish this point. The women were critical to the fact that the Democrats were able to capture 40 seats because you look at those suburban districts, it wasn't men that switched back from Trump to the Democrats, it was women, and it was educated white women. So for him to say this, I've got the greatest
Speaking of women,
women.
Here's the First Lady. She's defending her son in this interview with Sean Hannity. It aired last night. Here's what she said.
It does make me angry because children should be off limits, and I protect him and I want to give him normal life as possible. This is not normal life, but I like to protect him and give him the childhood that he deserves.
She answered a lot of questions about just that the criticism that her family receives, their family's name, and her son is still very young and the target of a lot of criticism himself.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to be Melania Trump in a White House where you have these scandals swirling. The president denies these affairs with these women, but it is the biggest news of the week right now. People are talking about his payouts to a porn star and a former Playboy playmate. And you have the bullying, and you have the online comments. So everyone agrees. Children in the White House should be off limits, especially 12-year-olds who, are going about their daily lives. However, I do think there are bigger questions about what this family has to deal with on a day-to-day basis and the kind of information that Barron might be getting from the news.
Well, it is a really, really simple rule about just don't bring up the children. And I will say overall, I mean, how much have we read about any secret information about Barron Trump? I haven't. And so I think most people are observing the rule as they should.
I agree.
What do you think she's talking about then?
I don't know. Well, I think what Shelby said, which is all of the derogatory news about the president and all of the things that he would read if he, surfs the net, could have a damaging effect, certainly.
Thanks, all three of you, all right? Juan, Shelby, Byron, nice to have you.
Have a great weekend.
We are blasting off into space, into history, too. One of the rocket ships reaching space for the first time. Could tourism soon extend to the final frontier? We'll put that question to a man who has been there. Private space travel. Who's on board?
Oh, on the great space coaster, off we go.
Clean release. Motor firing. Good ignition. Good control. 51.3 miles, about 82 kilometers. We made it to space.
That right there is a big deal. One giant leap for Virgin Galactic, private enterprise, completing its longest ever rocket-powered flight yesterday. They hit an altitude of 50 miles, and the two pilots on board are considered astronauts. Mike Massimino is an astronaut from NASA, senior advisor for space programs at the Intrepid Museum here in New York City. Hello.
Hello.
Fascinating.
Thanks for
What's
having
it
me.
mean?
Cool stuff, isn't it? Well, one of those guys you mentioned, they're both considered astronauts. One of them already was. C.J. Sturkow is a friend of mine who I worked with in the astronaut office for many years. So congratulations to those guys. But I think this is really a big step. Virgin Galactic has been looking into the tourist business of flying people into space for many years now. They had an accident a few years ago, which was a bad situation 4 years ago. And now they've turned that around with some successful tests and finally now getting two of their test pilots into space on their vehicle. Which
How much of a reality is that becoming? I know it's been talked about for a long time. I mean,
Yes.
are we talking this lifetime? This is
going to happen. Well, this was exactly what they wanted to have happen in the near future, was being able to successfully launch people into space and have them come back successfully, safely. And they're going to do a few more tests, I'm sure. I don't know exactly what their plan is or what their time frame is, but this is a huge step. This opens up the door to having more private citizens, more people experience space travel.
There's huge demand, right?
Well, I think he's sold over 600 seats already for this spaceship that he has, Richard Branson, for that. But it's really significant. If you look at airplanes going way back 100 years ago, Wright brothers took that first flight. And then it was used for military reasons and for government reasons, air travel was. And then it was barnstorming, really didn't know what to do with it. And then it turned into this commercial airplane industry that we have now, where every second we have an airplane taking off from somewhere.
If you're going to get
we're at that brink.
If you're going to get space tourism here, from liftoff until you hit 50 miles and then you come back down,
yeah.
How long is that ride?
I think the ride in total, I think, is more significant than that, because I think it's getting to altitude and so on. So the experience, I think, is more than just a few minutes. But your experience in zero gravity, I'm not sure exactly how much time they have, but it's enough to get the idea. It's enough to float around. It's enough to take a look at the view, to see the sun in a black sky, which is kind of cool, to see the horizon, to see the atmosphere, and to get an idea of how beautiful our planet is. So I think this is a great way to experience spaceflight. And the other companies, too, are going to be doing this.
But Branson beat what? Bezos?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it beat. I think I don't know if they're really in competition because they're different models. Bezos has a vehicle that is going to launch and return pretty much to the same place, not necessarily from a runway, from a launch pad, and then come back. It's not going to have any pilots on board. It's almost like an amusement park ride, sort of, where you're getting inside, going up and coming back. Branson's a little bit different experience. SpaceX is going to be sending people to the International Space Station, going to orbit, which is, again, a different experience. So I think each of them have their own purpose. I don't necessarily see them competitive. I think they're actually synergistic. I also think there's the one thing not to forget here, it's also the scientific benefit as well. they had 4 experiments on board this Virgin Galactic flight. So when you can get to zero gravity, not only can you do it for the tourism reasons, but also for scientific discovery, which is what they did even on this test flight.
I can't believe we're talking. I mean, it sounds like things are getting closer to this being a reality.
Yeah, it is amazing. This was a dream that people had many years ago and was never really something. I remember hearing about this maybe 10, 15 years ago when he started talking about these commercial companies, and there's something called the X Prize to get people into space. And I was very skeptical. I remember hearing the briefings when I was an astronaut, kind of sitting, I can remember in the back of the room, which is where I normally sat, but sitting in the back of the room hearing it, I was like, there's no way this is going to happen. Because I knew what it took for the government to fly people into space. I never thought a private company can do it. But this is what they're doing. And soon we're going to be flying astronauts to the space station with Boeing and SpaceX, and it's a new era that's coming. And I don't know if we realize, it's so cool, I don't know if we really realize what it means.
I'll see you
It's going to be exciting. I hope so.
I like your excitement about it.
Merry
That's
Christmas,
great.
sir.
All right.
Merry Christmas. Thanks for having me.
Mike. Well, it's President Trump versus Michael Cohen as the president and his former attorney sit down for dueling interviews, both sides firing accusations at each other. We will dig into all of this for you and the latest on this story with Chris Wallace. He is on deck, joins us next. Trump attorney Michael Cohen hitting back at his former boss, saying the president directed him to make hush money payments to 2 women during the 2016 campaign, something the president strongly denies. Welcome back to America's Newsroom, a brand new hour here. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm Bill Hemmer. Morning to you, Smitty. Cohen pleading guilty to violating campaign finance laws with those payments. Now he says the president told him to do it out of concern that women's allegations might affect the election. The president reiterating to Fox News that his former attorney acted alone. Cohen pushing back on that from ABC earlier today.
He's saying very clearly that he never directed you to do anything wrong. Is that true?
I don't think there's anybody that believes that. First of all, nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me, as I said in my allocution, and I said as well in the plea, he directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters.
Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris picks up the story this hour. Good morning, Catherine. To you.
Good morning, Bill. The president's former personal attorney, now convicted of multiple crimes, said it all comes down to timing in late October 2016, and he said the fallout of the Access Hollywood tape.
You have to remember at what point in time that this matter came about. 2 weeks or so before the election, post the Billy Bush comments. So yes, he was very concerned about how this would affect the election.
To help his campaign.
To help him and the campaign.
Cohen was responding to Harris's interview with the president, and during that interview, Mr. Trump said legal experts agree with him.
Michael Cohen pled guilty to something that's not even a crime. Wait a minute. These are campaign. Nobody, except for me, would be looked at like this. Nobody. What about Congress, where they have a slush fund and millions of dollars is paid out each year?
And the president went further, shooting back at his critics on the Hill, questioning whether payments from Congress to accusers violated campaign finance laws. Bill.
Well, there is also a deadline looming later today, Catherine, right? This is the case involving General Flynn. What should we learn or expect on that?
Well, the federal judge set a deadline just about 4 hours from now for the special counsel to provide all records and notes of Flynn's January 2017 interview about his conversation with the Russian ambassador. And despite a guilty plea of lying to federal investigators about that conversation, the president, who rarely comments about Flynn, said he believes his former advisor was pressured.
They convinced him he did lie, and he made some kind of a deal. And now they're recommending no time. You know why? Because they're embarrassed that they got caught.
Adding to the mystery, last year, former FBI Director James Comey and his deputy Andrew McCabe told Republican House investigators that the FBI agents who interviewed Flynn reported no signs of deception about his Russia contacts.
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration, in the George W. Bush administration, for example, or the Obama administration.
That was a comment over the weekend from the former director James Comey, where he acknowledged that he was directly involved in the handling of the Flynn interview and the decision to send agents without notifying the White House counsel, which he said was standard and would have been standard with his interactions with the Bush administration and the Obama administration. And just as a footnote, Director Comey will be back on the Hill Monday for a second round of questions with House Republicans, and we hope that transcript will be released sometime next week, Bill.
We'll wait for that. Thanks, Catherine Harris,
You're
running
welcome.
that down for us today in Washington. Sandra?
For more on all this, let's bring in Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. Good Friday morning to you, Chris.
Good. I just have to ask, I wasn't going to, but did Hemmer call you Smitty?
There's a good possibility that that happened.
and just so I know going forward, do you like that, or would you like me to call you Sandra?
I'm okay with it. Is that fair? I'm just fine when Bill Hemmer wants to call me Smitty.
And she can call me Hemmer, Chris.
I'll let, it's between anchors. I won't presume.
Yeah. Hemmer, you're next.
Thank you, Smitty.
Yeah.
Here's Wallace.
There's a little bit of a trend on the show of that happening, and I do respond to that. Chris, good morning to you. I want to get your thoughts first on Michael Cohen and this interview. Very revealing, very telling. I will not be the villain of his story, referring to the president. What were your thoughts as you watched on at that?
Well, you know, I think it's Shakespeare who said, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Hell hath no fury like a fixer scorned. And as assiduously as Michael Cohen has worked for more than a decade to protect Donald Trump, he seems to want to do everything he can right now to sink Donald Trump. I'm not sure that he can sink him. We have to see what he has to say. But he sure is not being shy about coming out and bashing the president. And the president, of course, yesterday saying, I never directed Michael Cohen to break the law. And here, less than 24 hours later, Cohen is saying everything I did was at the explicit direction of Donald Trump, and he knew exactly what he was doing. So, I mean, it's a he said, but obviously it's not helpful to the president.
Meanwhile, we had Hogan Gidley on with us from the White House this morning to react to it. He said this.
For the media to give credence to a convicted criminal who has lied on multiple occasions and self-admitted doing just that is quite frankly laughable. The president has maintained and has said many times he has never instructed Michael Cohen to do anything illegal, and we stand by that.
And the president maintains this morning from the White House that the law is on his side.
Well, I don't even play a lawyer on TV, so I'm not going to get into whether or not it's a crime. But the president's story on what he knew or didn't know about the hush payments has changed repeatedly. If you remember when he was on Air Force One, I think it was last April, he said he knew nothing about it and go ask Michael Cohen. Then about a month later, Rudy Giuliani was on Sean Hannity, and he said that the president repaid Michael Cohen for it. So I can't say that the president's story has been consistent in all of this. And as far as the Cohen being a liar, and he clearly is, and he admits that he lied, there's an interesting story today as just a matter of course. For the Southern District of New York to put that up, they have to have reason to believe that Cohen is telling the truth, which raises the real possibility they have other evidence. And remember, Cohen has been known, and we know at least of one explicit case, because we all heard it, to tape his client, Donald Trump. So who knows what evidence, in addition to his word, his very questionable word, Michael Cohen has.
Real quick, before we hear what's coming up on Fox News Sunday this weekend, Chris, want to ask you about this deadline, 3 p.m. today, these documents surrounding Michael Flynn and the interview with the FBI, January 2017. The judge has ordered those documents to be turned over. What do you expect to learn from that?
Well, I'm not sure we'll learn anything. These are very sensitive documents, and yes, the FBI is going to turn them over to the judge, and it certainly is interesting that the judge would want to see those documents. There's something about the Flynn guilty plea that he's not totally comfortable with, but whether or not that gets made public today or ever, I think that's in doubt. One question, though, I know that Flynn is saying, well, they never told me that I shouldn't lie to the FBI. If Michael Flynn didn't know that it's a crime to lie to the FBI, he's the only person I know who didn't know that. I mean, that's kind of standard operating procedure. You don't lie to the police. You don't lie to the FBI. I'm sort of surprised he's even making that argument because it's laughable.
Interesting. We'll hear a lot more about this, I'm sure, on Fox News Sunday this weekend. What's coming up, Chris?
Well, we are going to be talking about all this. We know one of our guests, not on any of these subjects, but something very interesting, Bill Gates, the head of the Gates Foundation, which has donated more than $46 billion to save billions or millions of lives, rather, around the world. And he talks about global poverty and health. We talked to him about what he says is a lack of leadership by the U.S. now. And we also talk about global warming and technology and how he feels about the fact, I don't know if it's true today, but it was true when I spoke to him, that Microsoft stock was the most highly valued company in the world at over $800 billion.
All right, we will stay tuned for all of that. And Chris Wallace has officially renamed the show Hemmer and Smitty.
I love it.
Chris Wallace, always a pleasure to see you on Friday morning. We'll see you this weekend.
Thank you, Sandra.
All right, thank you. We will have much more on all of this with former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer. That will be coming up at the bottom of the hour.
How about Wallace coming on there stirring the pot for you guys? I mean, that's quite clever.
He's good at that, isn't he?
Nice to see you, Chris. We'll see you on Sunday. All right, let's get to this story now from the American Southwest. An autopsy, an investigation has now been ordered. A 7-year-old migrant girl dying while in U.S. Border Patrol custody. Officials saying the child had seizures after she and her father were detained illegally crossing into the country. Jonathan Hunt has more on this story from Los Angeles. What have we learned, Jonathan?
Bill, good morning. At this point, we don't know because Customs and Border Protection hasn't told us, and frankly, they might not know, the minute-by-minute treatment of this Guatemalan girl once she was taken into custody. And the bottom line is, with the girl one among a group of around 160 people who turned themselves into Border Patrol agents near Lordsburg, New Mexico on the night of December 6th, those agents simply may not have had the personnel to assess and monitor the girl at all times. So here's what we do know. The girl, identified by the Guatemalan Foreign Ministry as Jacqueline Carl, was in the custody of CBP for 8 hours after being apprehended around 10 p.m. On the morning of December 7th, she began having seizures. Emergency medical technicians discovered her fever was 105.7 degrees. She was immediately flown to a hospital in El Paso, Texas, but she died of dehydration and shock. CBP says the girl had not eaten or drunk any water in several days. It's not clear if she showed any symptoms before the seizures. It's also not clear if she was given food or water while in CBP custody. The Homeland Security Secretary responded on Fox and Friends this morning.
This is just a very sad example of the dangers of this journey. This family chose to cross illegally. We gave immediate care. We'll continue to look into the situation. But again, I cannot stress how dangerous this journey is when migrants choose to come here illegally.
The ACLU Border Rights Center said, quote, "This tragedy represents the worst possible outcome when people, including children, are held in inhumane conditions." Now, officials say, Bill, an autopsy will be performed to determine the cause of the 7-year-old's death, and Customs and Border Protection says there will be an investigation to make sure all appropriate policies were followed. Bill?
Sad outcome here. Jonathan Hunt, thank you on that. Los Angeles, reporting there. Thanks.
A 2-day manhunt comes to an end in France. Police tracking down and killing the suspect in a Christmas market terror attack. How they found him.
Also, President Trump doubling down on his defense of Michael Flynn as the FBI faces renewed scrutiny over the way agents questioned him at the White House. Congressman Darrell Issa has a look at that coming up live next.
On the day that Flynn was charged, I said he was not guilty. That
FBI agents and said Special Counsel Robert Mueller pushed for a charge in the case. Congressman Darrell Issa is a member of the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees, and he joins us now. The president really doubling down on this, Congressman.
Well, I think the president's doubling down for a good reason. Something smells really bad in this investigation, and this is the reason that Judge Sullivan, a judge who's been on the bench for more than 30 years, appointed by Reagan, Bush, and Clinton to various posts, is asking for a lot more information, and he is demanding it quickly.
You know, Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal echoed a similar sentiment in her piece, checking Robert Mueller. She writes, quote, the agents, including the infamous Peter Strzok, showed up within 2 hours. Former Director James Comey this weekend bragged on MSNBC that he would never have gotten away with such a move in a more organized administration. The whole thing stinks of entrapment, she writes, though the curious question was how the Flynn defense team got the details. Your response to that?
Well, it's always hard to know how things leak in this town, but in the case of Comey, we know that he is he's a professional leaker. So to believe that leaks don't come for a purpose from DOJ or the FBI on both sides flies in the face of what we've seen over the last few years. I think the important thing, though, is that if Flynn was squeezed and pled to something that he didn't actually do, the truth is that's wrongdoing by the special prosecutor, and I think Judge Sullivan, who's no nonsense, is going to hold them accountable for playing fast and loose with an investigation that doesn't seem to have ever gotten to collusion not being a legal term, but in fact is getting to everything but in the effort to get to the president.
In the president's words, well, the FBI said Michael Flynn, a general and a great person, they said he did not lie. And that was the president and what he said at that meeting, on that meeting. Meanwhile, Alan Dershowitz, a law professor, was with us earlier on this program and said this on the situation.
All Americans who care about civil liberties and who care about controlling prosecutors ought to be deeply, deeply concerned about. This is the most unfair use of the FBI, of prosecutorial tactics. Remember, one of the FBI agents who went to the meeting was Strzok, who was committed to bringing down Trump. This is impropriety, and I hope the judge sees it that way.
So you're talking about Judge Sullivan and that he, you know, a lot has been written about him and that he is tough. So what do you expect to come from all of this? And we're waiting on now this 3 p.m. deadline today where these documents about the meeting will be turned over per the judge's request here. What do you expect is going to come up from all of this?
Well, I think the truth will come from it, and I think Alan Dershowitz once again shows his independence by calling out exactly what the problem is. The problem is prosecutors have amazing amount of power, and if they're using it to distort outcome, cut deals on reduced sentences for people who may or may not have done anything wrong, or certainly haven't done, in some cases, what they're being alleged to have done, then in fact we as civil libertarians should be extremely concerned from the left and the right.
You know, I was looking back at Kimberly Strassel's piece in the Wall Street Journal that I quoted earlier, checking Robert Mueller. She actually started out that piece by saying he's operated for 19 months as a law unto himself, reminding us of the awesome and destructive powers of special counsels. That is her piece. But as far as Robert Mueller and this investigation is concerned, here we are wrapping up 2018. What is your expectation for this investigation and the length at which it may go on?
Well, I think that running on empty isn't bothering the special prosecutor. I think Mueller has an open checkbook. Remember that his powers are not that much greater than any U.S. attorney's. What's different is he doesn't have another caseload. He gets to go anywhere and spend as much as he needs to spend on what he looks at as a broad investigation. Most U.S. attorneys would have a caseload of other cases and be saying, look, this is a dead end. I'm not wasting more of the taxpayers' money. But that's not the case here. So my expectation is this is going to go right up to the election if somebody doesn't say.
The victim had also been a musician, and it is said that they had bonded over their shared love of music. It is not clear, though, what led to this tragedy. Now, Sarah Pappenheim had been in Rotterdam a couple of years studying psychology at Erasmus University. She was also an avid drummer and had a gig lined up for December 22nd at a club in her native Minneapolis where she was meant to be headed for the holidays. Now, instead, friends will be performing to raise money for the repatriation of her body, which her mother has said they don't have the money for. Neighbors apparently heard shouting in Pappenheim's apartment the night she was killed, which was Wednesday night. She had previously complained to her mother over the phone about her housemate's mood swings. Her mother had told her to get out of that apartment. Reportedly, Pappenheim told her mother that she was afraid to leave him, that she was his only friend.
I feel quite sad about that. It's kind of not nice at all. I did know, I saw her around, she worked at Haas here, so it was like very shocking to hear about this.
Pappenheim was one of two. Her brother, Bill, committed suicide 3 years ago, and Sarah Pappenheim had been studying psychology, specifically the phenomenon of suicide, in order to better understand what had happened.
Well, tough story.
Bill.
Amy Kellogg watching that from London. Thank you.
Another victim has died in France after the mass shooting at a Christmas market in Strasbourg as French police tracked down and killed the prime suspect in that terror attack.
Also, Michael Cohen speaking out against President Trump the day after he was sentenced to 3 years in jail. Former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer reacts to that live, coming up in a moment.
I am telling the truth.
So you're done with the lying?
I am done with the lying. I am done being loyal to President Trump. And my first loyalty belongs to my wife, my daughter, my son, and this country.
Today's mass shooting at a Christmas market in Strasbourg, less than 24 hours after police tracked down the suspected gunman, killing him in a late-night shootout. Greg Palcott is live in Paris with this. Greg, good morning.
Hi, Sandra. Yeah, that latest news showing the real brutality of this attack. As you noted, 4 now killed, 12 had been injured. Some of them still remain in the hospital. Now, this after the attacker, again, as you noted, was found and then killed last night. This happened after a 2-day manhunt involving 700 French police and soldiers in and around the eastern city of Strasbourg. Not helping that search, the fact that Strasbourg is right on the border with Germany, not far from Switzerland. Police and officials in those two countries had to be activated as well. It turns out the fellow stayed close to home. Police got a tip last night that he was seen in his old neighborhood in the city. They cornered him. He shot at police. Several of them fired back. Now, 29-year-old Sharif Shirkat's parents were Algerian, but he was born in France. He's described to us as just a thug in and out of jail for years for common crimes. But according to the editor of the noted magazine here, Paris Match, he went to the extreme in the last few days. Take a listen.
All of a sudden, in the last few days, we've seen, he opened an account on Telegram, which we know is the common network for terrorists to communicate. And then he started, showing a little bit more of radicalization.
More of the radicalization. Well, as an act of defiance today in Strasbourg, the mayor reopened that Christmas market, which was the scene of all that violence. His words today, it now feels like the place is living again. One final note we have to add here, Sandra. France has more headaches to come tomorrow. There should be another rerun of that yellow vest anti-government round of protests. They are planned. They could be violent. We were there last week for it. We'll be here again tomorrow. Back to you.
Greg Palcott, thank you.
I told the truth. I took responsibility for my actions. He knows the truth. I know the truth. Others know the truth. And here's the truth. The people of the United States of America, the people of the world, don't believe what he's saying. The man doesn't tell the truth. And it's sad that I should take responsibility for his dirty deeds.
So there was part of the interview from ABC earlier today, his first interview, Michael Cohen, since being sentenced to 3 years behind bars, claiming the president directed him to make these payments to women during the 2016 campaign. President says Cohen acted alone. Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary and a Fox News contributor, saw the interview with me now. Ari, good morning to you. Been asking people all morning long about their impressions. What did you learn, or what did you take away from that Cohen interview?
Well, I still go to the core matter. Is it criminal activity to enter into hush money agreements? And they're unsavory, they are unseemly, but they're not criminal. And that's the crucial distinction here. And I think you still have a very aggressive set of prosecutors at the Southern District of New York pursuing something that they otherwise would never have pursued. They're trying to get Donald Trump. I agree with the president on that. Look, Bill, I just think if you're going to do this, if you're going to pay hush money, you can't use campaign funds. Can you imagine going to your contributors and saying, I need you to give money to my campaign so I can pay off women? That is not an appropriate use of campaign funds. This is a personal, private contract that people do enter into with one another. And that's why I just cannot see this as a criminal matter.
Okay, you've got this deal with American media. Who knows what they have? Who knows where it goes? There was one question you wanted to be asked that apparently in the clip or the interview we watched was not this one, but earlier today, the full-length interview. What was that, and why is that important?
Yeah, I wish George Stephanopoulos had asked Michael Cohen, are you aware of any payments like this, hush money payments, that Donald Trump made prior to becoming a candidate in June of 2015? Because that could have established that there is a personal reason, a family-related reason, and I wouldn't put it past President Trump, frankly, to have entered into such agreements prior to becoming a candidate. It proves that this has nothing, or is not driven by campaign activities. There are personal reasons, and that is often the reason that these celebrities enter into these agreements. Again, it's unseemly, it's not right, but the point here, it means it's up to the people to decide what should be done with Donald Trump, elect him or re-elect him, not the prosecutors. And that's a crucial issue in our democracy.
You know, Byron York made an interesting point last hour. He said, what about the Trump University settlement that was reached? And it reminded us, you know, trying to clear. Well, you clear the decks on a lot of these cases that are against you because you want to be the president.
Oh. Well, no, that's right. And you know, campaign finance law is clear. You cannot use campaign money to improve your personal image in the sense that you can't use it for haircuts. You can't use it to get a facelift. You can't use it to pay off women, I argue. These are all things that border on the personal that, of course, have an image impact on your campaign. But FEC has been clear about what is a campaign use and what's personal use. These things should be paid out of personal. And going after him for saying it should have been a campaign expenditure and you failed to disclose it, I just think that's incredibly weak. It won't hold up in court. And I'm guided by what happened with Ted Stevens. There are aggressive prosecutors who go too far and get things wrong.
Let's see what happens this afternoon in the Flynn matter. Quickly on the chief of staff, what's important in making this decision? We expected, maybe it's today, maybe it's a couple weeks from now.
Normally, I'm one who says whoever works at the White House, it's always important internal to that building, but people make too much of it. The public doesn't know who these people are. The exception is the chief of staff job. That is a crucial position to get it right. And Donald Trump's got to thread a needle here. He needs somebody who is absolutely loyal to him, who sees the world his way, but who's got the strength and the independence to keep the president on track for a president who sometimes will go off track. Very important decision.
Thanks, Ari. I think General Kelly may be sticking around a lot longer than people think, but that's just trying to read between the lines and try and figure it out. Thank you so much. Great to have you back on. Ari Fleischer, thanks.
The Wall Street Journal reporting federal prosecutors are looking into whether President Trump's inaugural committee misspent any of the $107 million raised in donations. The Journal also reporting investigators are looking into whether any donors gave money in exchange for political favors. Doug McKelway is on this story for us live from Washington this morning. Doug?
Morning, Sandra. Investigations are now bearing down from three different angles. The Mueller probe of Russia collusion, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York's probe into payoffs made to women, and now this third investigation into contributions to the Trump inaugural committee and a super PAC, a Trump super PAC. The White House claims the president has nothing to do with this, knows nothing about it.
And Sarah Sanders was absolutely right. This has nothing to do with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. It has nothing to do with the administration. During transition, as you know, the president had one focus, and that was to come into office, set up a government, and right the wrongs of the Barack Obama administration. He did just that.
The Wall Street Journal first reported yesterday that prosecutors in Manhattan asked a Tennessee developer named Franklin Haney for records of a $1 million donation he made to the inaugural committee. The paper says Haney later sought a $5 billion loan from the Energy Department for a nuclear power project, which to this day has never been loaned to him. The New York Times cites other contributions made to the inaugural committee and to a political action committee by what it calls straw donors from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Foreign contributions to inaugurals and to PACs are illegal. According to the Times, a central